Welcome to episode 42 of the Fire Safety Matters podcast, where we bring you the latest news, views and opinion from across the UK's dedicated fire industry. My name's Brian Sims and I'm the editor of Fire Safety Matters magazine. We're delighted that this podcast is sponsored by the Fire Safety event, which runs at the NEC in Birmingham from the 8th to the 10th of April 2025. Fire Safety Matters is once again serving as the lead media partner for the exhibition. To register for the show, visit www.firesafetyevent.com. As always, I'm joined on the Fire Safety Matters podcast by my colleague Mark Sennett, the CEO at Western Business Media and also the founder of Fire Safety Matters magazine. Hi Mark, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm great, Brian. How are you?
Very well, thanks, Mark. I'm working on the March printed edition, in which we'll be covering our special show preview for the Fire Safety event, of course, as always. And in the standard magazine, we're looking at fire alarms and detection, social housing, emergency evacuation and emergency lighting. We're also carrying 3 features on the very topical subject of the fire risk posed by lithium-ion batteries. And of course, the next article focused on the campaign for safe furniture. So printed digest for the readers there.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I was working overseas last week, came back yesterday, and I know this is the biggest issue that you work on annually in terms of Fire Safety Matters, but I also finally got the chance to read the Fire Safety Matters Guide to UK Fire Safety, which you published in December. I read it cover to cover, and it's interesting. You know, you said in there that we were going to take the Safer Furniture campaign another step forward, and again we are in the next issue. So you know that was obviously discussed in that in your foreword, in fact, in the guide, and you know these are really big print editions that we're doing here. I'd strongly urge anyone listening to sign up to get copies of Fire Safety Matters for free, or to look at a digital copy of our back archive, particularly the FSM guide. I mean, it covers everything, doesn't it, Brian? From alarm detection to suppression to regulation, training and competency, evacuation and emergency lighting, passive. It was probably a bit of a labour of love for you, wasn't it, the guide?
It was. It's a long project, Mark. As you know, we planned this about 6 months out from actually going to press. And obviously, it's collating lots of information. Obviously, there's a massive editing process to go with that as well. But it's a great publication. I think it really does this year shine a light on the entire industry. And that's what we wanted, a sort of cohesive and coherent publication as the heart of the fire safety sector, really.
Yeah, absolutely, and it has an exclusive survey, the results of that, with nice infographics and analysis of the survey, and there's some really exclusive content. It talks about the state of export, it talks about the state of diversity, it talks about training, it talks about recruitment, it talks about his market forces and problems, and if associations are actually stepping up to the plate, in your opinion, and in our audience's opinion. So it's a great read. You can see it on our website. Now, as I always say, you don't have to wait for this podcast to come out to get the latest news, prosecutions, products and services from the fire safety sector. You can go to our website, which is www.fsmatters.com. Now, listen, I don't necessarily expect you to remember that. Just throw into a search engine Fire Safety Matters and up we come. But the website is well worth a visit. Yep, you can get daily updates in there, but you can also go to our webinar section and sign up to our upcoming webinars, look at our back archive of webinars for free, sign up to get, as I said, print or digital copies of the magazine as well. Look at our archive of back issues on there, or you can sign up to our weekly e-newsletter so you can see the latest news in the sector emailed straight to you. You can, of course, follow us on X or LinkedIn as well. Brian posts all the stories through there, but you don't just wait for this podcast to come out. We have great fun on this podcast, picking out highlights of what's happened in the last month. But, you know, month is a long time in this sector, and I was just saying to Brian, just in the last week, there's been a number of big news stories coming out. So please do go to the website, fsmatters.com, to have a look. And, Brian, you know, that's probably where we should start. We always start with the news, and I'm going to throw it over to you this time to give us... What was the biggest story you wanted to cover this week?
I think it's this one, Mark. The government has signalled that it's about to embolden the programme designed to replace potentially dangerous cladding in a built environment by establishing a dedicated Remediation Enforcement Unit within the Building Safety Regulator at the Health and Safety Executive. On the 7th of February, Will Foster, Liberal Democrat MP for Woking, tabled a parliamentary question in which he asked Secretary of State Angela Rayner what steps the Department for Housing, Communities and Local Government is taking to ensure the effectiveness of compliance by contractors with and enforcement measures by the new Building Safety Regulator with the Building Safety Act 2022, and if an assessment of the adequacy of compliance by clients and contractors will be made with the provisions of that very Act. In responding, Mark, Alex Norris, Labour MP for Nottingham North and Kimberley, and the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, stated that officials at the Building Safety Regulator are currently working with their counterparts at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government to establish, and I quote, a dedicated remediation enforcement unit within the Building Safety Regulator itself. The Remediation Enforcement Unit, Mark, will be designed to hold owners of aluminium composite material clad buildings to account, enforcing remediation where necessary. According to Norris, this will be essential when it comes to meeting the government's priority task of remediating unsafe, higher risk buildings. What's more, Norris has affirmed, and I quote, we are considering further options to ensure compliance with the Building Safety Act 2022 as part of the government's ongoing spending review. The Building Safety Regulator takes action, of course, to ensure that all applications for build programmes that don't meet the regulatory standards of building safety are rejected. The introduction of the new regulatory regime initially resulted in many poor quality and incomplete applications from industry, in fact. The Building Safety Regulator continues to support applicants to meet the functional requirements of the building regulations. And on that point, Norris affirmed, and again I quote, Mark, it's worth noting that the requirements in the building regulations are not new, and rejected applications contribute toward the processing time of compliant applications. The Building Safety Act 2022 also requires that within 5 years of that act coming into force, the Secretary of State must appoint an independent body to carry out a review process. This includes reviewing the effectiveness of the Building Safety Regulator itself and the provisions made by or under the Building Act 1984, such as the duty holder duties and enforcement measures. On a logistical level, Mark, the new Remediation Enforcement Unit is expected to be operational at some point this coming summer. What do you have to add on this one, Mark?
Quite a bit, actually, Brian. Normally I would, praise this with a lot of my own feedback, but this is such a big news story that it keeps on rolling. And in fact, you've, as you know, written another story on this that just in the last couple of days, which adds even more meat to the bone. And you've done a story on the website, and again, go to our website, fsmatters.com. And on there's a search box that you can throw in searches for certain stories. And if you throw in there this search, Remediation Enforcement Unit signposted for Building Safety Regulator, you're going to get my update on this here. So I've got a bit more to add from the National Fire Chiefs Council. And the National Fire Chiefs Council has stated that a centrally coordinated programme is urgently needed in order to address the barriers to remediating unsafe buildings. So they published a new white paper titled Remediation, Fire Service Policy and Operations, and the NFCC has urged that despite progress being made, there's a long-standing challenges yet to be addressed. The white paper sets out some of the barriers to meeting the government's targets, including significant difficulties in identifying and inspecting affected buildings and tackling workplace shortages. The NFCC is also calling on the government to step up its efforts designed to manage the risks of those currently living in affected buildings by increasing the use of sprinkler systems in residential buildings over 11 metres tall based on risk assessments. That's something, I completely support. And then you've got, in addition to this story, since the Grenfell Fire Tower, the tragedy in June 2017, the Fire and Rescue Services have played a crucial role in identifying unsafe buildings, supporting enforcement and ensuring the immediate safety of residents. However, the NFCC is adamant that the Fire and Rescue Services are under pressure to balance this work against other key priorities, among them protecting people in other high-risk buildings such as care homes and hospitals, while having to manage increased funding pressures, workforce shortages and the burgeoning costs. The government published its remediation acceleration plan in December, Brian, as you'll know, which duly committed to complete the remediation of all buildings over 18 metres in height within government-funded initiatives by the end of 2029. So for buildings over 11 metres tall with safety defects, remediation is intended to be completed for a clear timeline for completion by the end of 2029. The Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and we're going to be talking a lot more about them and Mr. Norris in this podcast, is estimated that up to 12,000 buildings over 11 metres tall need to be remediated, with 60% of affected buildings still to be identified. That's a huge challenge, Brian, and a lot of work to be done before 2029. So the white paper from NFCC warns that with the current capacity to review or inspect all mid-rise residential buildings from 11 metres to 18 metres, it would take between 12.76 and 24.23 years at an estimated cost of 284.24 million to 608.82 million. So that really goes on from my point a moment ago of just how big a job this is. So this is a lot to take in. There's a lot of meat on the bones of this story. I would strongly urge everyone listening to this to go back to our website, fsmatters.com, and to be honest, at this point, put in the search box Building Safety Regulator, and both parts of the story come up. As I said, we've got some interesting news coming out of the Home Office to talk about in the second part of our news on this podcast. But I want to change gears slightly here, Brian, and talk about some sad but not particularly unexpected news. News broke in early February that Anticipate London, or to most of us, they all know that as FireX, or IFSEC, or Safety and Health Expo, or the Facilities Show. We're all familiar with them. They've been a mainstay in the sector for over 30 years. They are closing. They've been closed. This is particularly sad for me and for Brian because we both worked on those events in past roles. I started my career in B2B journalism in the health and safety and fire sector in the safety and health practitioner, which is also being closed, and that's been going for over 50 years. It's long been a digital-only publication. In fact, is a competitor, or was a competitor of mine, because I also own Health and Safety Matters magazine. And I feel really sad about the news. You know, I learned so much. My grounding in these sectors was working in SHP and working in Safe Enough Expo and going into FireX. I mean, I've been every year for the last 15 years, and hey, I'm not a veteran compared to many others, and Brian, you may have been to more than me. Before I bring you in on this, how many FireX or IFSECs do you think you've attended over the years, Brian?
I can tell you pretty much, hopefully exactly, Mark. And my very first one was 2001. So that was my first IFSEC. I'd just taken on the editorship of a magazine called Security Management Today. And my last one with the company, as in with UBM, or it was obviously prior to that, it was CMPI as well, and then obviously became Informa. My very last one with the business as part of the business was 2014, which was the first one when it moved to London.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about this a bit more in a minute. You know, this is particularly personal to Brian and I because we worked there. We became friends there and colleagues there. And Brian and I wouldn't be working together now if we hadn't worked together in products over there. I am sad to see it go. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people were thinking, well, Mark, didn't you found the fire safety event, which is now the dominant event? Yes, I did. But I'm a former customer of FireX from when I was at the Fire Protection Association. This isn't surprising news, Brian, that it's closed. So to be clear, it got rebranded last year as Anticipate London. It ran in December last year. And this won't be a surprise to people it's gone because it's been shrinking ever since it moved to London a few years ago. And the second it moved out, when I joined this company I now shockingly own, which is Western Business Exhibitions, and we already had an event called the Health and Safety event, and my previous bosses Tim Else and Neil Weston instantly moved the Health and Safety event to the NEC. So the year after, Safe Enough Expo and IFSEC and everything had gone, there was still a Health and Safety show, and they launched with me the Fire Safety event in there, and ever since that event has been there. It's grown and grown and grown. It is now the dominant brand in that sector for a major exhibition. And you could see it was on borrowed time, unfortunately, FireX and IFSEC and, Safe Enough Expo, etc. And, last year it was so much smaller. So this will not come as a shock to anyone. Probably the death knell of it was running it in December. It was, they rebranded it, they tried different things, and I know the official terminology is that it's been retired. But, to those of us that have worked on it, worked with it, even been competitors of it, it's not particularly a surprise because the fire safety event, the security event, and the health and safety event are completely dominant in that aspect now. But what I do want to say is there's some really good people that have worked on that over the years, friends of mine, including you, obviously. And, I feel sorry for those that have lost their jobs. I feel sad that what was such an unbelievably strong brand is no more. But, it was quite major news as it used to be the place to go for the annually, and it hasn't been, in my opinion, for a while. Brian, I'm sure you've got some more to add on this.
I can only echo what you've actually said, Mark. I mean, obviously, I was with the portfolio for 25 years when I worked at UBM, I cut my teeth like yourself as far as the security sector is concerned, and the fire sector, of course. I cut my teeth there, both digitally and in print, and was very, very closely aligned to the IFSAC brand in particular by organising the conference programme and chairing that conference programme. Attended the show every year for the best part of 20 years. So it's very much ingrained in my DNA, if you like, Mark. And I too am very, very sad that the brand has gone. IFSAC in particular was a brand that resonates literally globally. And to lose that is not great for the sector. So I'm particularly sad, the same as you.
Yeah, and I think it's probably right. I mean, I don't know if you have it to hand, Brian. I can get it if you don't. But there was obviously a statement released by Informer that owns the event. Have you got that to share?
I do. The statement's fairly short and sharp, Mark. It says, we've taken the decision to retire Anticipate. This industry is about evolving and adapting. We know that the ways in which UK professionals want to stay informed across the many topics and specialisms within security, safety, health, buildings and facilities are indeed changing. We're proud to have served this fantastic community over the years. Thank you to everyone who's been part of the journey. The statement concludes, Mark, to our valued Anticipate, IFSEC, FireX, Safety and Health Expo, Facility Show and Safety and Health practitioner customers, we'd like to take a moment to thank you for being an essential part of Anticipate and its related events. You've helped us to create many memorable moments over the last 50 years, and we thank you for your continued support. While this chapter comes to a close, we look forward to continuing our work together in new and exciting ways. Back to you, Mark.
Yeah, whatever that may mean, Brian. But it is, it is the end for IFSEC, FireX, Safety and Health Expo, and the facilities show. So at this point in the podcast, we introduce our first guest, and it's quite often a recurring guest and a good friend of ours, and it is again Warren Spencer, who is the managing director of Blackhurst Budd Solicitors. Now, before Brian, you do an introduction of him, it's worth saying that we've got another webinar coming up with Warren. We do probably once a quarter an exclusive 2-hour legal webinar with Warren for you guys to sign up to. This one is taking place on the 28th of March at 10 a.m. till midday. That's a Friday. We tend to do them on Fridays. A good day to do it. As we record it, that is exactly 30 days away from today. And this is a really interesting topic, Brian. It's on enforcement notice and prohibition notices. So Warren will provide an outline of the rules relating to issuing enforcement and prohibition notices, including the appeals process under Article 35 and full discussions of Articles 30 and 31 of the Fire Safety Order. So this seminar, for those of you listening, would be appropriate for both fire and rescue service personnel and those with property management interests. So Warren will explore the appeals process, including summons issued by the court and the directions provided by the courts in a subsequent trial process. This will involve civil proceedings as opposed to criminal proceedings. Warren will outline the evidence required to appeal, whether it be as an appellant or as a respondent, together with skeleton arguments made and expert evidence. So this is one not to be missed. It takes place on 28th of March 2025, 10 a.m. till midday. It's well worth signing up for. By the time you hear this podcast, the link will be on the website, the FSM website, and on social media. I think I'll probably drop it in the news story as well on this episode of the podcast, so you can sign it straight from there. That'll probably be the easiest way for you to find it. So, Brian, it's probably this point I'll throw over to you to introduce Warren.
Our first guest on episode 42 is a returning and regular contributor to the Fire Safety Matters podcast. Warren Spencer is the managing director of law firm Blackhurst Budd. He's one of the most experienced solicitors focused on the fire safety domain, having prosecuted and defended the greatest number of cases under the Fire Safety Order. In conversation with Mark, Warren examines a case study from the healthcare environment and also why apportioned fines in the fire sector tend to be lower than for prosecutions in the health and safety domain.
Morning, Warren. How are you?
Morning, Mark. I'm fine, thank you. And yourself?
Yeah, good. It's first podcast of the new year with you. Great to have you back. Did you have a good Christmas break?
Yep, I managed to get away, so it was nice to have a break. It was a busy year last year, so yeah, all good.
So you were saying you went on a cruise. It wasn't a saga cruise, was it? You surely can't be at that age.
It wasn't a saga cruise, no. No, it was an Asia cruise.
Well, I'm glad you had a great time, and thanks for coming back to join us. So we were talking off air just about a multitude of topics we could talk about today, and you talked about a really interesting case to do with a care provider, and then we started talking about supported living. So can you tell us a bit more about this case you're involved in the healthcare sector there, the big fine?
Yeah, there was a case in Lancashire involving supported living with 3 residents. And I think what the important point about that case was that it wasn't really clear to the defendant that this was in fact a house that was covered by the fire safety order. There were 3 people living in it independently, and that the defendant, I think, was, well, certainly from the papers, took the view that this was not a house which needed a fire risk assessment for the residents, as the fire safety order did not apply. There was a fire risk assessment, but that was in respect of its own staff. And so that was the major failing in that case. Sadly, it was a case where the 3 residents were vulnerable, and one of the residents set fire to the premises. He was actually prosecuted for arson and was sentenced in a completely separate case. But obviously the case involving the fire service relates to the lack of fire safety provision in the premises, and that started with the lack of a fire risk assessment in respect of the residents generally.
And you obviously cover a wide variety of sectors. Is this an area that you're seeing more and more enforcement action against in terms of the care sector?
It's an area where there's a lot of confusion with the fire safety order. We've done webinars and podcasts on it before, as you're aware, mainly because of the kind of crossover between domestic living premises, which invariably they are, and whether or not the fire safety order is covered, but also the number of parties involved. There can be county councils involved with providing the living space. There can be management companies and care providers involved, property providers as well involved with leases. So it's always very difficult to outline who exactly has which fire risk management responsibility. So that's an area which is confusing, as we've talked about in the past. But generally, care premises involving care homes and care provision, assisted living, all difficult areas for fire safety matters. There are obviously difficulties from a legal point of view, but also from a fire safety point of view, in that providing cover for escape and assisting escape in premises which may not be purpose-built, really difficult area. But this case was significant in that it was a fairly high fine of £135,000 plus nearly £20,000 costs. So that was a significant fine for a case of this nature.
Well, it's interesting, you talk about that being a significant fine. I'm not sure if we talked about this before. We may have done way back when in a webinar, but obviously I've got another publication, Health and Safety Matters, where we're covering prosecutions all the time brought by the Health and Safety Executive. And yeah, 100 grand fines are big ones, but in general, there's multi-million pound fines there. There's always several £100,000 fines coming in for big incidents. When you look to the fire sector for prosecutions, this one stands out because it is big. When you talk about HMOs or various other things that, we're talking about tens of thousands of pounds fines. There's a real big difference between the enforcement penalties done by the courts for fire offences than health and safety offences. Do you have a view on why fines are much lower in this sector than others?
Yeah, there's a very clear reason for it, and that is because the court can only fine the defendant according to the defendant's means. So it goes off turnover and it goes off profit. And these companies have to file their accounts, and that's where the court starts with the matrix for deciding the fine. The health and safety cases, the prosecutions can be against much bigger companies. There's much more of a strict liability aspect to certain health and safety offences. So when the court comes to sentence, the first thing it looks at in a fine case is, well, what is the company's turnover, and then what is its profit, and the fine has to be proportionate, and it has to take into account the matrix, which most courts will use the health and safety sentencing guidelines. But what tends to happen, I think, is that the defendants in fire safety cases tend to be smaller companies, and on that basis that results in smaller fines. There can be big companies involved in fire safety cases, but very often, for example, in the care home sector, there can be a big company that is the overarching company in relation to a care home, but the care home itself may be run by a separate company, a subsidiary company, and because that is the company that will be the employer and that is the company that will be the defendant, then it's that company that's turnover and profits would be assessed for the purposes of a fine. So it could be, and certainly about 5 years ago I had a case where the general company, the overarching company's turnover was 360 million, but in fact when we prosecuted one of the subsidiary companies that ran a care home, their turnover was in the region of 9 to 12 million, and therefore the court has to start with that. And of course, very small profit margins in the care sector, so the court will take account of the turnover. But if the profit is only £100,000, then the court will take that into account when issuing the fine, because usually the court will fine a defendant such that the fine can be paid within 12 months and at the most 3 years, either at a monthly rate, but over that period. And so if the company's not making enough money to pay the fine, the court can't fine that much because it's setting it up to fail. And if it sets it up to fail, there's got to be further punishment. So that wouldn't be fair.
So, Warren, I know you're busy. You've got plenty of casework on at the moment. But if people want to get in touch with you, get some advice, or take up your services, what's the best way to get in touch?
Well, Blackhurst Budd Solicitors, fire safety law. I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on X, as it used to be Twitter. And I think, fortunately, I'm in a position now, if you Google me, Warren Budd Solicitor, you'll get me.
Thanks again, Warren, for joining us, and we look forward to bringing you back on the next episode.
Thanks, Mark. Good to speak.
Returning to the news now, and Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has issued a statement on the machinery of government in which it's confirmed that responsibility for fire will be transferring from the Home Office to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government as of the 1st of April this year. The call for a single Secretary of State in charge of fire and building safety was one of the key recommendations outlined in the Phase 2 final report produced by the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Panel. In the statement, the Prime Minister observed, and I quote, "On the 4th of September 2024, I announced that the government would respond in full to the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 2 final report within 6 months. In response to one of the recommendations from that report, I'm confirming today that responsibility for fire will move from the Home Office to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. This change will bring responsibility for building safety and fire under a single Secretary of State, providing for a more coherent approach towards keeping people safe from fire in their homes." The Prime Minister added, "The Home Office will retain management of the airway service contract on behalf of the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government and remain responsible for the Emergency Services Mobile Communications Programme and His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services." As I said, Mark, the change will be effective from the 1st of April. In paving the way for what's being heralded as the largest house building programme in Britain since the post-war era, the Prime Minister has also set aside an additional £2 million worth of funding to support the Building Safety Regulator in continuing to improve processing for new build applications, which we've talked about already, Mark. Responding to the Prime Minister's announcement, National Fire Chiefs Council Chair Mark Cardigan has said, "We welcome the transfer of fire responsibility to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. Fire and rescue services face considerable challenges from implementing significant reforms following the Grenfell Tower fire, through to ensuring resilience and sustainability, and on again to adapting to evolving risks. We look forward to working collaboratively with the MHCLG to support fire and rescue services and firefighters in securing fire investments and driving improvements right across the sector." In conclusion, Mark Hardingham has explained, "As we move forward, we remain committed to working collaboratively and constructively with government to deliver the best possible outcomes for fire and rescue services across the country and their communities they diligently serve." Any thoughts on this one, Mark?
Brian, I've seen it all before. I still remember 6 or 7 years ago, I think it was. Apologies, the dates aren't quite accurate. The responsibility for for fire and the firemen is going into the Home Office. So it doesn't surprise me seeing it move to another government department at all. I mean, how many fire ministers have we had in the last 2-3 years? I think it's about 5. So there's always changes. Now, obviously, one of those is enforced because of a change of government. So, yeah, this is obviously something that has come as a knock-on effect with the change of government, with the finding of the Grenfell inquiry and Danger to Hackett's report. This is all part of the change process that's happening there. I'll talk more about the individuals involved in a minute, but to a bit more to add that you've written on the story, and of course you can go to our website fsmatters.com and just in our search box there, search responsibility for fire to be moved from the Home Office to MHCLG, and up this story comes in full. But Steve Wright, who's the General Secretary for the Fire Brigade Union, has commented on this. He says the Fire Brigade Union wholeheartedly welcomes this move as an important first step towards repairing the damage done to the fire and rescue service by recent governments. We're also pleased that the government is acting promptly in response to the Grenfell Tower inquiry. Our thoughts are with the bereaved and the survivors and the community and their fight for justice. He also went on to say, I look forward to working with the ministers to deliver a fire and rescue service that's fit for the future and the national standards and adequate funding necessary for those tackling the growing risks that we face. Not a surprise that the Fire Brigade Union are supportive of a Labour government change. Not really surprising at all. So what I would say here, Brian, is this wasn't a huge shock to us, was it? Because we were working on an agenda for Fire Safety Matters Live, which takes place on the 5th of June 2025 at the Coventry Building Safety Arena. It's worth noting it's free to come. We had over 700 people come last year, and registration is now open. Please go to fsmlive.co.uk and register for free to come to that event. I'll talk a bit more about the event in a minute. But we suspected this was going to happen because we have got opening addresses being delivered by not one, but 2 government ministers, which is pretty much unheard of for an event of this sector, in the fire sector. The Fire Minister, Dame Diana Johnson, will be doing one part of the opening address, but the second part of it will be delivered by the previously mentioned Alex Norris. And if you weren't keeping track of what we said earlier, Alex Norris is the Secretary of State for Ministry of Housing, Community and Local Government. So we did smell that something was up when MHCLG asked to be part of this as well as Dame Diana Johnson. So we've got both of them doing the opening address, and I would strongly urge anybody listening to make time to come to Fire Safety Matters Live at Coventry on the 5th of June, the Coventry Building Society Arena. In old money, that is the Rico Arena, to be from that area where Coventry City play. Worth noting, Brian, my beloved Oxford United play Coventry City this weekend, and my partner and her kids are all Coventry City fans, so everybody pray for me that good overcomes evil this weekend and Oxford win. But yeah, come to the Coventry Building Society Arena on the 5th of June and listen to these addresses. You know, it's rare that you get a chance to be in front of ministers, and we've got 2. So come along to that. There's a great agenda on show. We've got sessions on taking back control of fire engineering, a session on the Building Safety Regulator and your regulatory realities, the future of smart fire system management. We've got competency, compliance and best practice. What does good look like? Being delivered by the FIA. We've got domestic fire safety hidden truths. We've got 8 steps to managing and containing lithium-ion fire risks. You know, we know how topical that is. You mentioned it earlier. We've also got choosing the best fire detection technology for your application. That will be a great session to come to, particularly installers. Specifying fire detection systems for a major upgrade or refurbishment. Again, great for end users or installers there. Competent fire risk assessors. Are there enough? And how do we fix the skills gap? That's been delivered by Colin Todd. So, you know, he's a legend of the sector. Definitely worth coming to hear Colin speak. Then we've got a session by FireQual on why qualifications are under scrutiny in 2025. We have also got a session on approaches to understanding engineering systems fire requirements, and that is really a passive fire protection session being delivered by the ASFP. And we've got a great session on fire evacuation in healthcare premises. What can we prove works? And that's been delivered by Peter Aldridge of the National Association of Healthcare Fire Officers. So we've got 12 sessions, all CPD accredited. You get a CPD certificate for coming. please do come to any and all of those sessions on the 5th of June at the Coventry Building Safety Arena, Fire Safety Matters Live. You'll get free parking on site, you'll get free lunch, free tea and coffee, free cloakroom, free Wi-Fi. Everything is free. We cover all the costs for you. We pick up the tab for that. To be honest, it's probably going to have, because it's co-located also with Security Matters Live. We're probably going to have about 1,000 people across all of the events there. We've got institution fire safety managers doing their own conference there. We've got an installer conference being done by SSAIB. There is Association of Security Consultants doing their own session there, as well as a RIFPO. It's a real industry day. Now, your pass, registering for free at fsmlive.co.uk, that will allow you to access Security Matters Live exhibition area and conference, as well as it would the Fire Safety Matters Live conference exhibition area. And all the free food, tea and coffees in the exhibition area. We've got 40 of the leading brands in fire safety there, from Advanced to ACO to Apollo to BAFE to the Fire Protection Association to CTEC to Dynamic CCTV to Eaton to Everlux to a VAC chair, Safety Chair, Firequal, Global HSE Solutions, Jacktone, Kentech, Quellfire, other associations like ASFP and NAFO are there, Industry Fire Safety Managers. We've got Vox Ignis, Vidicon, Exact Training, Thurner Cable, SCIB, Ventro Group. There's loads and loads and loads more. Fire Chief. I think I mentioned FFE. So everything from training providers there to associations to key providers of everything from active to passive fire protection and suppression. So do come along. Do go and get free advice and look at the latest products and services. It's a great chance to network with your peers too. Pretty much a who's who of the sector is there, and you get to obviously enjoy 2 ministerial addresses. And of course, it culminates in the evening with the Fire and Security Matters Awards, which I'll come back to in a minute, which is a completely separate event in the evening there, and I will come back to that in a moment. But Brian, you're chairing the conference at Fire Safety Matters Live. It's quite an in-depth agenda, as I've just covered, but I know it's an event that I love and you enjoy too, isn't it?
I do very much, Mark. I think if you're a B2B journalist, I've probably said this before on previous podcasts. In fact, I'm sure I have. But if you're a B2B journalist, one of the greatest things you can do, and one of the things that I guess fills you with the most pride, is engaging with the audience and moving on debates, moving on best practice, continuing professional development, of course, which we're accredited for with these conferences. And that's the meat and drink for what we do, I think, engaging with your audience and having them engage with you. I must commend you again, Mark, as per last year. This programme, which I looked over this morning before we started recording the podcast, is quite phenomenal. I think that to have the 2 ministerial addresses, as you said, is brilliant. I think that's an absolutely perfect spot on timing. And you did mention the session by Colin Todd. I think that's going to be a draw in its own right, frankly. I mean, this is a huge area now. Obviously, we talked about remediation of cladding within this podcast in quite some depth, and that session is prime, news for, I think, obviously the risk assessor fraternity. There's been a lot of things going on around this particular issue, Mark. Of course, you've had some assessors shying away from this kind of work and actually leaving the industry, which Colin has mentioned several times over the piece when I've spoken to him at industry events. So it's a very big and prominent area now. We need to make sure we have risk assessors who are qualified, that cohort. It pretty much mirrors the situation that's going on in security, Mark. There is a skills gap there, whether you're talking physical security acumen or particularly cyber security acumen, and the government and industry organisations have been working on this for some time. We now have the same situation in fire, as far as fire risk assessment is involved. And of course, this is one of the most important practices in the sector. You have to get this right for building control, etc. So yes, it's a major area. You've done a great job in the conference programme. Really, really good. I'm looking forward to chairing that once again. There's several sessions in there I picked out apart from Collins and the ministerial addresses. And I must mention the session there. You touched on the session that's been given by Chris Dunn from FFE. Of course, I recently hosted a webinar with Chris around optical smoke beam detection, and people who missed that session can obviously watch that back on the website by visiting the webinars tab on the homepage. So nice linkage there as well, Mark. And Matt Humby, of course, from Fire Chief Global about lithium-ion batteries, as I mentioned at the start of the podcast. We decided to feature on this in a major way, this topic, lithium-ion battery fires, in the current edition that's coming up, the March edition. There are 3 features within that, all talking about different angles and different areas to do with lithium-ion battery fires. And in future editions, We will have some articles from fire and rescue services on the particular ways in which you have to tackle this kind of fire. So lots of interest coming up, Mark.
Yeah, there is. And, to anyone listening to this, I would ask you a favour. Please do come along with and bring as many of your team and colleagues as you can. This is the sector's biggest annual conference now. It was over 700 there last year, and I think now that we've also co-located it with the Security Matters Live conference, this event is absolutely perfect if you're an installer, it's absolutely perfect if you're a fire risk assessor or a consultant, and it's absolutely perfect if you're a fire safety manager. We can't call them end users, people that are responsible for fire safety in premises. Whatever part of the sector you are, there's relevancy here for you. There's great networking opportunities. It costs you nothing to come, and I feed you for free in here as well. Whether it's CPD you want, and that's plenty that Brian just told you. If it's networking you want, there's so many people you can meet there. Or, of course, you can go to guidance to key associations that are there on hand to give it to you for free. Or, of course, and I'd ask this to you, do go around the exhibition, because we've got such an A to Z of the biggest brands in the sector there. They have got solutions for your workplace that's worth looking at. So please do come to the event. Please do look around the exhibition. Please do seek out Brian and I and tell us what you think of this podcast or what you think of FSM. We're always keen to hear from you. But it's free to register. And you'll get access to Fire Safety Matters Live. And, of course, you can go down the staircase to Security Matters Live. It's connected by a staircase. And all you have to do is go to fsmlive.co.uk to register for free. Please do bring you and your colleagues. If you can't remember that, just search Fire Safety Matters Live on a search engine. It will come. And it's a Coventry event that we are talking about on the 5th of June. Now, that brings me to the next point. And that is what happens in the evening, the Fire and Security Matters Awards. They take place, 5th of June, same venue, the Coventry Building Society Arena. Reason I bring this up is the deadline to enter for free to these awards is the 31st of March. So probably when you're listening to this, you've got about a month till the deadline, but that will be quick upon you. You can now register up on the website and you can put the category you're interested in your basket and update it as you go along. You have to do it all in one go. It automatically saves it and you can edit it, but you must submit your entry before the 31st of March 2025. It's open to everybody, okay? I would strongly urge you to enter, please, because this is the perfect way to get yourself, a colleague, a team, your organisation, a client, a product, a project, a fire safety consultancy, a training firm, a salesperson. There's so much that can be recognised here with various categories. It's completely free to enter. Now, I enter FSM and all of my other publications into awards, and I know how much it means to us and the team when we get shortlisted. This is, I would argue, even more important. You're in a life-critical sector where you protect people and you protect property. And what you do is really important and it deserves being celebrated and it deserves being recognised. So there are categories such as Fire Innovation of the Year, Fire Safety Manufacturer of the Year, Fire Safety Installation Company of the Year, Fire Safety Project of the Year, Fire Safety Manager of the Year, Fire Safety Team of the Year, Fire Industry Woman of the Year, Fire Safety Consultancy of the Year, ESG Company of the Year, Distributor of the Year, Commercial Person of the Year, Training Provider of the Year, Campaign of the Year, and Customer Service Award. These are all relevant to fire. There are other categories identical for security as well. Please do enter these. We want to get the message out about the great work that you're doing. And if you get shortlisted, it is great recognition. And then it comes down to the actual event itself on the 5th of June 2025. It's even bigger this year, Brian. We had sold out the last 2 years in a row, 840 odd people. We've now taken an even bigger space. It's going to be such an event. We're expecting probably about 1,000 people there. There is a great pre-dinner drinks party and lovely 3-course meal. The entertainment this year is Omidija Lily, well-known comedian, also well-known actor he's in James Bond films and The Mummy as well, but he's a great comedian. He's an Iranian-born comedian. And then we have just a small matter of the awards themselves. And then the after party, be like nothing else you've seen in the sector. We have got Dodgems in there. We have got fairground stores where you can win prizes. We've got casino tables for fun money in there. We've got photo booths with props. We've got pick and mix carts, and all that stuff is free to do, right? And you have Drinks on the table for the first round of drinks is on us. On there, we put some table wine and some beers on the table as well. It is the sector's biggest annual networking event. It's a true celebration of all that's good in the fire and security sectors. So not only do I hope you enter, I hope you'll come. I mean, even if you don't enter, I'd suggest you come from a networking point of view to the evening. You can buy tickets now to the awards. It's all on the website, firesecurityawards.com. But right now, I'm focusing on entries, Brian. 31st of March, 2025 is the deadline to submit your free entries. You're free to enter. Just go to firesecurityawards.com or just throw into a search engine, Fire and Security Matters Awards, and up it comes. I mean, it is probably the favourite part of my job, Brian. I say that quite often, seeing how much it means to people getting shortlisted, let alone winning or getting a highly commended or recommended, and seeing so many people there. It's just such a great, nice celebration. It shines a light on this sector like it should do, and I know that it's something close to your heart too, isn't it?
It is very much, Mark. I mean, I think my very first gig, if you want to call it that, as editor of Security Matters, obviously when I came to this business, pretty much equated to going back the way to, I think it was 2001, which was my first ever standing up appearance, if you want to call it that, in front of the industry as editor of Security Management Today, back then, in front of the Grosvenor House audience, about 1,000 people, all obviously in black tie, etc. I knew about 10 people in the audience, I think, at that point, but that was my baptism by fire, to sort of cause a pun there, I suppose. And I guess after that, you either sink or swim. But I think, in terms of public speaking, I was trained, I think, up about a year or so later to do public speaking, and I learned lots of great things from a chap called Peter Gilman from the Times. He trained me up on both the written word and public speaking techniques. And I've loved it ever since. I've been doing black tie events ever since then. So you're talking now about 25 years, Mark. So I guess this is probably my 25th year this year of doing the opening address for an awards event. And again, I love that. It's engaging with the audience. It's being front of your audience that you do the magazines for. And it's great for them to engage with us and vice versa. So yes, it's a brilliant event. And credit to you again, Mark. You founded Fire Safety Matters magazine and you founded these awards. And in a very short space of time, just a few years, we've gone from a standing start to 1,000 in the room. It's incredible. Again, we didn't have that traction back in the day when I was at the Builder Group, and we launched the Security Excellence Awards as it was back then. I think the very first event was a lunchtime event at the Four Seasons Hotel in London and gained about 250, I think, bums on seats. But now we're talking about 1,000 in the space of a couple of years, Mark. It's incredible traction.
Well, you won't see a night of entertainment like it. You won't see a night of networking like it anywhere else in the sector. But it has a much more important message than that. It is about recognising the great and the good of the sector. So please be part of this. Please help us keep growing these things and keep recognising more and more of you. Please go to just throw in a search engine, Fire and Security Matters Awards, or go to the website firesecurityawards.com and enter for free before the 31st of March. Now, that concludes the news part of this part of the podcast. So, Brian, we have a second guest on this edition of the podcast, and who have you got for us?
Our second guest on episode 42 of the Fire Safety Matters podcast is Lee Nichols, Technical Director at the Siderise Group. A graduate in building acoustics from Edinburgh Napier University and also a chartered building surveyor, Lee joined Siderise in February last year from BMI UK and Ireland, where he served as portfolio and business manager. Recently, Lee has presided over Siderise's route to successfully completing the Code for Construction Product Information's assessment process for the company's RH horizontal and RV vertical cavity barriers for cladding projects. During our interview, Lee concentrates on several core areas, among them current market challenges and also the attainment of competence. Welcome to the podcast, Lee. First of all, why is early engagement with passive fire protection solution providers so important in your view?
Thanks, Brian. I think it's seen as such a complex subject. There's lots of things that came out of the Grenfell inquiry. There's lots of discussion around Building Safety Act, Building Safety Regulator. So I think, early engagement with providers is key. It's key for those fire engineers, etc., to understand exactly what testing we have, what third-party certification we have, what substrates we've tested to, etc., etc. And I think it's fair to say that not all products are equal. Siderise has always prided itself on the amount of test data that we have available. Unfortunately, that's not in the public domain for various reasons, but it is available at engagement stage. And we would always say early engagement always means you'll get the best solution. We can obviously work on specific detailing within voids, etc., etc. So yeah, we would always encourage early engagement.
And what challenges are you seeing in the market at the moment, Lee, notably so around product testing and certification, and also the level of knowledge required for correct interpretations to be made?
Testing is exactly that, the amount of test data that people have. Like I said in the first question, Siderise have got huge databases of testing, decades worth of testing. We like to pride ourselves that we do a lot of testing. Test data is key. The Building Safety Regulator has stipulated in certain cases that they wish to see test data as opposed to, say, third-party certification. And that really has caused a challenge with specifiers understanding what really is required. And really, there's a lot of uncertainty about routes to compliance as well. We're about to publish some information around that to help people understand ways of compliance. But really, it's a whole challenge around the Building Safety Act, and it raises quite a few challenges in terms of testing and compliance.
What form of technical support does Siderise offer to specifiers and fire engineers, Lee? And precisely why does the business champion the adoption of a more personalised approach?
We've always championed ourselves on having a huge technical team. In terms of Siderise, from a passive fire perspective, our technical team is considerable in terms of numbers. So we pride ourselves on being able to offer early engagement, which we've already mentioned, right the way through to project support. We can offer a complete package from that early engagement right the way through to final completion or sign off of buildings. We've got a huge amount of technical support in terms of collateral, so standard details, etc., etc. And that is readily available to our client base.
In your view, how can manufacturers actively support the industry when it comes to the attainment of competence requirements?
That's an interesting question. In terms of competency, as a business, we all have, anybody within the Siderise business has their own individual SCEBs. That looks at individuals' competencies. It looks at individuals' areas of training requirements, and it also gives levels that they would need. So, for example, a lot of people within our business are IFE accredited, so IFE level 2 or 3. All of our engineers are IFE level 3. So I think there's a lot of the industry struggling with what sort of competence is needed. There's lots of associations out there who can help this, but I think, from a manufacturer's perspective, it's crucial that all of our technical team, whether they be customer facing or not, are suitably qualified and suitably accredited.
Technical drawings are often a core requirement for specifications, of course, Lee. Is Siderise able to offer any dedicated support in this area?
Yes, we 2024-2025 we put together a new strategy for supporting design teams, specification, etc. Part of this, we are looking at what we offer in terms of standard details, drawings. There's lots of new things that are going to come through in 2025. So basically from somebody specifying, somebody doing drawings, we will be providing 2D CAD details, 2D CAD blocks, etc., etc. The reason we've decided to go down that route is it gives that individual doing the drawings, it gives them comfort that the drawing is correct, the detailing is correct. So if you like, we are providing a support function, I suppose you could call it, for that individual. They're not having to look at details and try and interpret it themselves. They can come to Siderise and we will provide details accordingly. The details will be specific to what they're building, they'll be specific to void sizes, etc., etc. So that's something quite exciting and quite unique to not just what we do, but unique to the construction industry. So yeah, it's something that we're championing this year, and it'll be something that we'll be launching in a few months' time.
How can system manufacturers support collaboration between design teams and contractors on site?
It goes back to what we said earlier. We very much support right the way through from that early conception to site workings. And we have a site inspection team. Support installations, whether that be via the installer, the main contractor, subcontractors. We have various ways of doing that. We record that, we provide reports, provide support in terms of installation training, whether that be internal or on site. So really it goes to that holding hand scenario where we're trying to give as much support as we can and, as much confidence that that installation will be done correctly when it gets to site.
Finally, in what ways can manufacturers demonstrate their own technical expertise and also due diligence?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think there's two sections to this. Firstly, due diligence. Obviously, there is the Code for Construction Products Information. We've been an advocate with that since its inception. Last year, we had a number of product sets assessed and approved, so they're in the CCPI website at the moment. The CCPI process means that they audit all of your claims in terms of they look at the complete due diligence of the business. They also look at the due diligence of individual products. So for us, that's that's a real positive for the industry. We'll be supporting that, throughout 2025 and onwards. The view of the business is all of our products will become CCPI verified. In terms of expertise, our own technical expertise, internally, we've already mentioned about the SCEBs, but how we demonstrate that to our clients and customer bases, they're aware of what we do. They're aware of how we get involved in certain bodies, whether that be ASFP, etc., and really promote our technical expertise within the business. So, you'll see it in various social media platforms. We put all of our employees through various training. We get them to certain levels. And really, I suppose from an industry perspective, that gives confidence that we are raising the level in terms of what manufacturers offer in terms of expertise.
That brings us to the end of episode 42 of the Fire Safety Matters podcast. Many thanks indeed to our special guests on this edition, namely Warren Spencer of Blackhurst Budd Solicitors and also Lee Nichols from Siderise. You can read more on the issues raised in this edition of the podcast and others by visiting the Fire Safety Matters website. The web address you need to access is www.fsmatters.com. We do hope you've enjoyed the content delivered in the podcast and found it informative. Please do contact us if there are any particular themes or issues you would like us to explore on upcoming editions. You can do so on X, formerly Twitter of course, by using the hashtag FSMPodcast. On that note, do make sure you follow us on X at FSMatters_MAG and also access our LinkedIn page at Fire Safety Matters magazine and website. Please do like and share the content of our regular podcasts and spread the word among your industry colleagues. You can listen to the Fire Safety Matters podcast for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube or Podbean. All you need to do is enter the term Fire Safety Matters into your chosen platform search box. We'll see you next time.